On the 8th of June 2026, Keir Starmer stood up at London Tech Week, which is already a slightly bizarre venue for this sort of announcement. And he told Apple and Google they have 3 months to start scanning photos on your phone. 3 months. September the 8th is the deadline. And if they don't do it voluntarily, he will legislate to make them. Right, so let's unpack all of this and talk about what's actually being proposed here. Why it's technically a much bigger deal than the headlines are making it sound. And why. And I want to be really careful about how I frame this. Why the problem that they're trying to solve is real, and the solution they've landed on is completely wrong. So the announcement, as it was presented at London Tech Week, sounds reasonable at first pass. Children are being harassed with explicit images. Children are generating and sharing explicit images of themselves and others. This is real, it's happening, and it's causing serious harm. Starmer wants Apple and Google to make it impossible. His word. Impossible. For children to share, take, or view nude images on their phones. On the surface, that sounds like it could be a reasonable policy. The problem is what it actually requires technically. Because you cannot make it impossible for a child to view nude image on a smartphone without building a system that scans every image on that smartphone. Every photo you take, every image you receive, every file that passes through the camera roll. And that system doesn't just exist for children. It runs on the operating system. It runs on your device. Now, Starmer did say, and the government press release does acknowledge, that adults will be able to view adult content by proving their age, which I'd love to have explained in more detail, because the announcement doesn't define what that means. Is it a passport scan, the brick card, biometric check, a third-party age verification service that you have to hand your face to? They've not said. What they have said is the technology already exists, so companies should just turn it on. That's the bit that reveals exactly how much the government understands about what they're asking for, because it's almost true, and that almost is doing an enormous amount of work. Let's actually get into the technical side of this, because I think it's genuinely interesting, and it's where most of the press coverage has been a bit hand-wavy. Apple does have a feature called communication safety. It uses on-device machine learning to detect nude images in certain Apple-controlled contexts. Messages, AirDrop, FaceTime, shared albums. It blurs the image. It shows a safety prompt. It optionally notifies a parent if the child's account is set up with family sharing. This is a targeted system that works in specific app-level contexts where Apple controls the whole pipeline. What Starmer is asking for is different. He's asking for something that prevents a child from taking a nude image. So that means intercepting at the camera level prevents them from viewing one. So it means scanning everything that hits their screen, including browser downloads, third-party messaging apps, file transferred over Bluetooth, and prevents them from sharing one, which means every outbound image across every app, from WhatsApp to Discord to Signal to a random file manager. This is not communication safety. That is OS-level device-wide content scanning. That is a fundamentally different thing, and it does not currently exist in the way the government is describing. Now, the reason this matters, and the reason that people like Signal are furious about this, is that what Starmer is essentially asking Apple and Google to build is client-side scanning. And client-side scanning, for those of you who haven't had the pleasure, is a concept that's been floating around government security discussions for years. And every single time it gets seriously proposed, the cryptography and security community lines up to explain, quite patiently, why it's catastrophic. Right, so let me take you back to 2021. In August of 2021, Apple announced a feature called NeuralHash. Straightforward. Every photo on your iPhone that was going to be uploaded to iCloud would be hashed on device, run through a neural network that produced a kind of fingerprint for that image. And those fingerprints would be checked against a database of known child sexual abuse material. If you hit a certain threshold of matches, Apple would generate what they called safety vouchers, upload them to their servers, and if enough vouchers are accumulated, a human reviewer would look at them, and if confirmed, notify the relevant authorities. Apple presented this as privacy preserving. The scanning happens on your device. Apple never sees your photos directly. It's encrypted all the way through. The security community looked at this and said, no, absolutely not. The researchers didn't just push back philosophically. Within days of the technical details being published, multiple proof of concept scripts appeared showing how to generate collisions, benign images that NeuralHash would flag as matching known CSAM. Images that looked completely innocent to a human, that the algorithm thinks are something else entirely. That's a false positive problem. And it's not an edge case. When you're running this across hundreds of millions of devices, even a tiny false positive rate translates into an enormous number of innocent people having their devices flagged to law enforcement. Then there's the creep problem. And this is the one that I think is most important to understand, because it gets to the heart of what Signal and Big Brother Watch and every other privacy organisation are raising right now. You've built a system that can scan images on a device and compare them against your database. You built it for CSAM, but the system doesn't care what the database contains. You could swap in a database of political symbols, a database of protest placards, a database of documents that a government has decided are illegal to possess, a database of faces. Once the infrastructure exists, the scope is limited only by whoever controls the database, and the people who control the database are governments. Apple, to their credit, read the room. By December 2022, they'd formally cancelled NeuralHash. They said, essentially, that after extensive consultation, they decided not to proceed. Now Starmer wants someone to build it anyway. Here's the thing that's worth knowing. This didn't come from nowhere. The Online Safety Act, which became law in 2023 under the previous government. This didn't come from nowhere. The Online Safety Act, which became law in 2023 under the previous government, has been, from the start, a sort of Swiss Army knife of content moderation obligations. It's had multiple stabs at mandating what's variously called client-side scanning or content detection in encrypted communications. The government, at various points during the drafting of that bill, was asked, does the technology you need to do this actually exist? And the honest answer, which officials gave, to their credit, was no. Not yet. Which is a remarkable thing to put into legislation. We're going to mandate a technology that doesn't exist, on the basis that it probably will. What's happened since is that the political pressure has been sustained. The Online Safety Act's amendment regulations that came into force in January 2026 expanded the list of priority offences, the categories that trigger the strictest compliance duties, to include things like cyber flashing, which means services have to monitor at scale, proactively, for content that falls into these categories, And now, Starmer's announcement is the next escalation. We're not talking about platforms monitoring what gets uploaded to their servers anymore. We're talking about the operating system on your personal device. That's a qualitative change. That is a line that, once crossed, is very difficult to walk back from. Right, let me come back to the age verification piece, because I think it's being underplayed in the coverage. Starmer said adults would be able to bypass these restrictions by proving their age. He didn't say how. The government has been developing a digital ID scheme, the BRIC card, which was announced in September 2025. The idea is a single digital identity document for UK residents. Now, I'm not going to tell you that digital ID is inherently sinister. We already know that. Countries do this. It can work fine. But think about what's being constructed here. You have, on the one hand, device-level scanning that monitors the images on your phone. And two, you have an age verification requirement to opt out of that monitoring. And three, a digital ID scheme that ties your real identity to your device. These three things, individually, you can make arguments for. But together, they describe a surveillance architecture, not hypothetically, not a slippery slope argument, structurally, technically. That is what you are building. Because the opt-out isn't a privacy opt-out, it's surveillance opt-out. You're not escaping being watched. You're registering yourself as an adult who's chosen to access adult content on a device that is running government-mandated scanning software. Silky Carlo at Big Brother Watch put it pretty directly. This will result in population-wide ID checks for all of us to use on our phones, tablets and laptops. And Signal, who, full disclosure, have an obvious commercial interest in end-to-end encryption surviving, made the argument that matters here. Mass surveillance capabilities, however sincere the promises of those who initiate them, never remain narrowly scoped. And that's observing a pattern that has repeated consistently across every country that has built this kind of infrastructure. Right. And here's where I want to be careful, because I said at the start that the problem is real, and I meant it. Children are being sent unsolicited, explicit images. The statistics on intimate image abuse are going up. A parliamentary report from May 2025 found nearly a 21% increase in reports of intimate image abuse in 2024. Young people, particularly young women, are being harassed, extorted and harmed by the circulation of explicit material. None of that is made up. None of that is a pretext. I understand the political logic here. Starmer is under pressure. There's a possible leadership challenge. He needs a legacy. Child safety is broadly popular. It's emotionally resonant, and tech companies make a very convenient villain. But, and this is the bit that should make you uncomfortable, the policy he's proposing almost certainly won't solve the problem he's describing. And here's why. The children who are being harmed by intimate image abuse are not primarily being harmed by images taken on their own phones. They're being harmed by images taken by other people, shared across platforms, sometimes originating devices outside the UK entirely. OS-level scanning on UK devices doesn't touch that. An explicit image taken on an Android phone in another country and sent over an end-to-end encrypted messaging app to a child in the UK. What does that proposal do about that? It blurs it on the child's phone, if the scanning system catches it, which it might not. And then what? The image still exists. The sender is still out there. The actual mechanisms of harm here are largely about platforms, about discoverability, about the tools that make it easy to find and target victims. Platform-level intervention, content moderation, faster removal systems. The 48-hour takedown proposal that's going through the House of Lords is, I'd argue, a more targeted response to the actual problem. Device-level scanning is a much bigger infrastructure play, and the gap between the stated problem and proposed solution is where you need to look very carefully. Right, before we get into the last part of this, If you found this useful or interesting, a subscribe means the algorithm actually shows this stuff to other people, which is how my channel keeps going. And drop a comment below. I'm genuinely curious whether you think this is being overblown or whether people aren't worried enough. Alright, back to it. So, what are Apple and Google going to do? Apple hasn't formally responded to the June 8th announcement as of this recording. Google, similarly, quiet. What I'd expect, and this is speculation, this is just my view, is some version of what Apple has already been doing. They'll gesture toward explaining communication safety features. They'll extend the context in which the nudity detection works. They'll talk about family link and parental controls, about account-based age gating. What they will resist, hard, is anything that requires them to run scanning on content that isn't going through their own services. Because that's where it stops being a we have parental controls conversation and starts being a we have fundamentally changed the security model of our operating system conversation. And Apple in particular has an enormous amount of brand equity tied up in device privacy. Their whole marketing position for years has been your data stays on your device. We can't see it. The government can't see it. Building a backdoor, even a well-intentioned one, destroys that position completely. There's also the global problem. The UK is not the most important market for either Apple or Google. If they build OS-level scanning for UK devices, they have to either build a different version of iOS and Android for the UK, which is operationally possible but complicated, or they build this into the global OS and then every government in the world starts asking for access. China's going to ask, Russia's going to ask, India's going to ask. And at that point, you don't have a child safety tool. You have a global surveillance platform that you handed over because a democratic government with good intentions asked nicely. That's not a hypothetical, that is the exact playbook. Let me talk about function creep properly, because I think people use the term without really explaining what they mean. Function creep is not just the government might abuse this later. It's something more specific and more mechanical. When you build a system, you make decisions about what it can do based on what you need it to do right now. But the architecture constrains what's possible in the future. And it also creates institutional capability. If Apple builds a system that can scan images on your device and compare them against a hash database controlled by the UK government, several things become simultaneously true. First, that system now exists. It's in the codebase. It's been tested. It's in production. Second, the government now has a relationship, a contractual, legal, regulatory relationship with Apple, in which Apple is obligated to run scanning on behalf of government-defined content categories. Third, expanding that relationship is vastly easier than creating it. The infrastructure is there. The legal framework is there. The precedent is there. Adding a new category to the hash database is a policy decision, not an engineering project. And policy decisions are made by whoever is in power at the time. Not the people who built the system, not the people who set the original scope, whoever is in government when someone decides the database should expand. That's what Signal means when they say capabilities never remain narrowly scoped. It's not that they distrust Starmer specifically, it's that the system they're being asked to build is structurally incapable of remaining limited to its original purpose. Okay, so if device level scanning is the wrong answer, what's the right one? I'm not going to pretend I have a complete solution, because anyone who tells you they do is selling something. This is genuinely hard. But there are approaches that target the actual mechanism of harm without building surveillance infrastructure. Platform liability, making platforms genuinely responsible, financially, legally, for the speed at which they respond to reports of intimate image abuse. The 48-hour removal proposal going through Parliament is an example of this. It puts the obligation on platforms that host and distribute the content. not the operating system of every device in the country. Education, which sounds boring and like a cop-out, but actually has evidence behind it. Programs that teach young people about consent, about image-based abuse, about what to do if it happens to them, have measurable effects. They're not glamorous. They don't let a PM make an announcement at a tech conference, but they work. Better tooling for victims, making it faster, easier, less traumatic to report image abuse, to get content removed, to pursue legal remedies against people who share it. These aren't perfect. None of them make it impossible for a child to receive an explicit image, which is the bar Starmer set. But that bar is, I'd argue, an impossible bar. And the attempt to reach it by building surveillance infrastructure is going to cause more harm than it prevents. Right, so, September 8th, what happens then? Honestly, I don't think Apple and Google comply fully. I think they offer something. Expanded communication safety features, stronger default parental controls, better age gating on account creation. And the government has to decide whether that's enough or whether they legislate. If they legislate, it gets interesting, because the Online Safety Act has already been tested in court, and it's had some choppy moments. A legal challenge to mandatory client-side scanning on human rights grounds, on proportionality grounds, on the basis that technology required would break end-to-end encryption, is not a given to fail. And there's a broader international context. The EU has been fighting about chat control, essentially the European Commission's equivalent proposal, for years. And it keeps stalling because member states keep pushing back. The UK post-Brexit doesn't have to align with EU laws, but it does have the capability to credibly operate in the same digital space as EU citizens. And so my honest prediction, the September deadline produces some announcements, some gestures, some press releases. The legislation, if it comes, gets tied up in a committee for longer than Starmer's timeline implies. And the actual infrastructure, if it ever gets built, looks different from what was announced. But the direction of travel is set. And that's the thing worth paying attention to, not the September deadline, specifically, the direction. So, here's where we land. The UK government wants to build device-level photo scanning infrastructure with mandatory age verification to opt out, to protect children from explicit images. The problem it's trying to solve is real. The technology required doesn't fully exist yet. The version that does exist, client-side scanning, was proposed by Apple in 2021, was torn apart by the security research community for being exploitable and prone to false positives, and was abandoned. The infrastructure, once built, cannot be meaningfully constrained to its original scope. The people who make encrypted communication for a living, Signal among others, say this endangers everyone, and I tend to agree. And the actual mechanisms of harm the proposal is supposedly addressing are not primarily device-based, and will be better addressed by platform accountability, faster removal, and proper support for victims. That's the situation. Draw your own conclusions. Drop a comment, especially if you work in security or policy and think I've got something wrong, because I'd genuinely rather be corrected than be confidently incorrect. Take care. See you in the next one.